So TSA is actually very excited about the MDL and digitization of identity. First, we see this kind of as an inevitable technology, and it's, as history kind of has shown with payments going from cash to where we are today to mobile, we see the evolution of identity documents kind of move in that same way. This also provides a unique opportunity where the digitization of identity also kind of is a win-win for everybody in that it enables more trust in a transaction as well as some efficiencies. For these reasons, TSA is actively in a proactive posture in regard to MDL, in that we are currently engaging in the standard development as well as exploring technical options and integration points so that we can actually start working this into our operations and technology that we're using for the identity transactions that we're currently engaged in. Next slide, please. So what does a win look like for TSA? So this is kind of what's driving our current actions that we've been going down. First and foremost, our objectives with engaging with the ISO community is that kind of establishes the foundation for what we will need to be successful in our environment. So TSA transacts with 2 million plus people a day, kind of pre-COVID and that normal realm, but that's a lot of people. But to assure that everything works, the communication has to be interoperable because we're going to be getting people from different jurisdictions with different phones running different applications. Those need to be seamless. We also need to make sure that we trust the data that's coming from these devices and issuing authorities. And also the privacy is something that's very big. We have a very specific mission in making sure that a person is who they say they are and that they are supposed to be flying that day. So really what this enables us is to take the bare minimum information that we need, do our job, and assure that the passenger is getting the appropriate risk. And lastly, speed. Obviously, with the volumes that we deal with, any sort of hiccup kind of has that freeway effect where you start getting a backup and we end up on the nightly news. Again. So with all that said, that's imperative that we start actually exploring the technology, developing and integrating this so that we can work out those details. Next slide, please. So our plans as far as moving forward and what we are starting to explore is an upgrade to technology we are currently deploying. So for those of you who are not familiar with CAT, which stands for Credential Authentication Technology, this is something that we are currently rolling out and deploying to airports. What this does is it automates the ID authentication by looking at security features on the ID. It takes the biographic data off of the ID. We use that to compare to the flight manifest that we push out to the edge for that airport. The next development step for CAT, we recently piloted this last summer in Las Vegas McCarran Airport, is to automate the biometric matching to that, right? So that's the person verification. Did the person who handed this ID over, are they the rightful owner of that? So there's currently an effort going on to develop these systems and deploy those. That's going to be the system that we're also looking to upgrade to encompass this MDL touch point. One of the recent developments and kind of the emphasis that's been put on given our current COVID situation is that the CAT, as well as this future CAT camera technology, they're looking at making everything passenger facing, which before that was TSO facing. Kind of the natural point, as David pointed out moments ago is that MDL is naturally a passenger facilitated transaction, right? Being that there's nothing you're handing over. It's also less ambiguous, and it's something that people are currently becoming more accustomed to with some of the digital payment structure. So that's kind of where we're going, and eventually we're looking to kind of automate some of our identity transactions, which can also lead ways to improving passenger throughput per TSO hour. Next slide, please. So I kind of touched on some of these points momentarily, but for the customer at least, initially, the transaction is not going to look much different other than with this transaction, another advantage is you no longer need to hand a TSO over a boarding pass and then your ID. With the credential authentication, since we're automating the check with that manifest, we know that you're supposed to be there. So really the transaction is a lot more simple. All you need is your phone to actually engage in this transaction. I think the biggest wins that we have here, though, are that we can, through automation, increase efficiency while increasing trust in the actual transaction, given the touch points with the infrastructure that David specified as well. Next slide. So to actually make this work, what are things that we are currently working through? And I think probably the biggest hill that we're going to be climbing is with the cybersecurity. So when you look at TSA's equipment that we have, it's generally not connected. On top of that, you also do not have wireless communication enabled on those. So that's going to be something new that we're going to have to push through. But it's something that we're prepared and that we're working closely with our IT security folks so that we can actually support the NFC, Bluetooth, and Wi-Fi communication protocols so that we can actually communicate with the person's devices. I think another thing that we are aware of too is that to kind of put our focus on dealing with the actual phone to verifying device communication, our trade-off is going to be in putting focus on supporting the online transaction mechanism. So there's a few hurdles, obviously, in building trusted transaction to issuing authorities, as well as just even making sure that the back-end infrastructure can support the load. Again, 2 million transactions on top of just normal traffic. Any sort of holdup can have big effects on an airport. So I think really moving forward, TSA in the ISO compliant engagement is looking to at least day one facilitate the offline transaction modes that were kind of discussed, where we will rely on the public key infrastructure to actually make sure that we have the public keys for those issuing authorities. Which kind of leads me to one of our next challenges is, right now we're kind of on the bleeding edge of the industry kind of forming around this. So that's something that we'll be closely monitoring as well as working with is to, how do we establish and roll out connections to trusted entities or some sort of master list provider to facilitate the trust in the transactions that we would need. I think lastly, and this is very specifically a TSA problem, is the deployment. And that's going to be a balance of what equipment is out there. So how many airports currently have CAT technology? How many airports have the CAT-C technology? And then how do those align with states that are issuing ISO compliant MDLs? And, what is that overlap with our airport risk and load?